Ah, my dear friends and countrymen, it is I, a young Walt Whitman, here to lament upon a most peculiar plague of our modern existence. No, not war, nor famine, nor the ceaseless churning of industry, but something far more insidious, far more soul-crushing. I speak, of course, of the grand and eternal pastime of humanity, the passing of the buck. You see, I have discovered that in this great democratic experiment of ours, nothing is so universally cherished, so sacredly upheld, as the art of avoiding responsibility. Indeed, it seems the backbone of our proud republic is not liberty, nor justice, but rather the sacred right to say, "Ah yes, but that's not my department." Let us, for a moment, imagine the common man, a good, honest fellow with a simple request. He seeks redress, perhaps, for an insurance claim. He dials the number of his insurer, and lo, a voice, sweet and synthetic, greets him. "Your call is very important to us," it says. A lie, of course, but one offered with such serene confidence that it almost feels like the truth. After pressing 1 for claims, 2 for billing, and 3 to contemplate his own mortality, he is met with a representative. Ah, but not the right representative. "No, sir," they say, "you must contact the adjuster." So he contacts the adjuster who, in their infinite wisdom, directs him to the underwriting department. And underwriting, not wishing to be left out of this magnificent ballet of bureaucracy, points him squarely back to customer service. Thus, he is caught in the whirlpool of corporate indifference, where no resolution can be found, only the faint and distant echo of, "That's not my job." But my friends, let us not think this disease is confined to the halls of insurance alone. Oh no, it spreads like a mighty river through all avenues of life. Consider, if you will, the grand edifices of government. A man seeking assistance with a most pressing matter. Perhaps his home is flooded, his fields ruined. He approaches his local office with hope in his heart and mud on his boots. "Not our jurisdiction," they say with an air of finality, and with a gesture, they send him to the state office. The state office, upon hearing his plight, assures him it is, in fact, a matter for the federal government. And the federal government? Ah, they find themselves unprepared to comment, and suggest he start again at the local level. Round and round he goes, a weary Odysseus of the bureaucratic sea, seeking not Ithaca, but merely someone willing to say, "Yes, this is my problem." But alas, no such hero exists. And what of the private sector, you ask? Let us speak of the modern marvel known as customer service. Suppose one purchases a fine contraption, a coffee machine perhaps. It malfunctions. He calls the retailer, who suggests speaking to the manufacturer. The manufacturer, of course, places blame on the shipping company, who in turn shifts it back to the retailer. And thus, our humble coffee drinker is left with no resolution, only a vague sense of regret and an unyielding thirst. But my friends, I must confess, the true artistry of passing the buck lies not with corporations, nor governments, but with us, the people. For in our homes, among our kin, we wield this power with terrifying efficiency. The dishes are unwashed, the floor unswept, and when questioned, we adopt the ancient and time-honored refrain, "It was not I." In truth, it was never anyone. Chores, my friends, like responsibility, exist in a mysterious realm, where all claim innocence and none accept guilt. And so, dear listeners, I leave you with this thought. In the great poem of life, we are all but weary travelers, passing the buck like a baton in a never-ending relay of avoidance. And if you seek an answer, a solution, a conclusion, well, I am afraid you must inquire elsewhere. I am but a humble poet, after all, not my department. Ah, but before I take my final bow and retreat to the solace of verse, let me indulge you with a few tales of a darker, more sinister shade. For you see, the art of passing the buck is not always confined to the harmless drudgery of misplaced paperwork, or the labyrinthine mazes of corporate indifference. No, my friends, there are times when this avoidance of responsibility becomes not just inconvenient, but cruel, even criminal. Consider, if you will, the hapless worker, a humble soul who relies on their job to provide for their family. One day they fall ill, nothing too dramatic, just the sort of malady that requires a note from their doctor, a form to be signed, a fax to be sent. Ah, but the doctor, in their infinite forgetfulness, does not send the paperwork, and when our worker returns to their post, expecting sympathy, they are instead met with cold indifference. "You didn't provide the documentation," says the employer, eyes sharp and unyielding. "You're terminated." Who bears the blame? Not the doctor, who insists they never received the request, not the employer who simply followed policy. No, it is the worker alone, standing in the wreckage of their livelihood, wondering how a simple piece of paper could wield such power. And yet, the buck continues its journey, free and unburdened, leaving the worker behind. Or perhaps you have heard the tale of the insurance company who, through an unfortunate clerical error, denies a claim for life-saving treatment. The hospital filed the request incorrectly, they say, shrugging as though the very concept of compassion were an ancient relic. The hospital, of course, blames the insurer's ever-changing policies, and somewhere in the middle, a patient waits, growing sicker, weaker, until there is no more waiting to be done. But fear not, the paperwork is eventually sorted, filed, and approved, long after it is needed. And then, there is the tragedy of the falsely accused, an innocent man caught in the grinding gears of justice. A misfiled report, a witness with a poor memory, a detective too eager to close the case. Each hand, eager to absolve itself, pushes responsibility to another. "Not our mistake," they each say in turn. And so, the man sits behind bars, staring at a clock that ticks away years of his life, waiting for someone, anyone, to admit fault. But fault, as we know, is a slippery thing, one that can always find another shoulder to rest upon. Or let us turn to matters of the heart, where passing the buck takes on a cruel, intimate form. A husband, when faced with his failings, blames his wife for her lack of understanding. The wife, in turn, blames her children for their constant needs. The children, confused and burdened, blame their teachers, their friends, the world. And thus, a family fractures, not with a dramatic explosion, but with a slow, insidious shifting of blame that leaves no one truly accountable, and everyone a little more broken. And so, my dear friends, I leave you with this. Passing the buck is not always an amusing diversion or a bureaucratic annoyance. Sometimes, it is a dagger hidden in the folds of red tape, a silent thief that steals jobs, health, freedom, and even love. And if you should find yourself in the midst of such a storm, remember, though the world may turn you into its scapegoat, you are not alone. There is solace yet, if not in justice, then perhaps in poetry. But as for fixing the problem, well, that's not my department. But let us now speak of tragedies of a more personal nature, where the passing of responsibility is not merely bureaucratic, but deeply human, and far crueler. Consider, if you will, the tale of a young woman, full of hope, full of love, and now full of child. She reaches out to the father, trembling with a mixture of fear and longing, tapping out those fateful words, "We need to talk." But before her message can even settle in the air, she finds herself blocked, erased, deleted, exiled from his digital kingdom with the ruthless efficiency of a man who wants nothing to do with consequences. And so, the burden falls solely upon her shoulders. She turns to friends, who tell her, with sympathetic nods and eyes averted, that they just can't get involved. The family she once thought unconditional now offers conditional love, weighed down by whispered judgments and weary sighs. "You should have been more careful," they say, as if hindsight were a currency she could spend at the grocery store. She seeks shelter, calling local services, only to be met with an endless refrain of red tape and rejections. "You don't qualify for assistance," they say. "Try the women's shelter across town." The shelter across town, of course, informs her they are at capacity, directing her to yet another number, another form, another empty promise. And so she wanders the city streets carrying not just the weight of an unborn child, but the crushing reality of abandonment, by the father, by the system, by those who once claimed to care. Each door she knocks on swings open just wide enough to offer a sliver of hope, before being shut again with the dreaded phrase, "I'm sorry, but there's nothing we can do." Meanwhile, the father, comfortable in his carefully curated existence, moves on with his life, blissfully unaware, or perhaps willfully ignorant, of the storm he has left in his wake. "Not my problem," he mutters, never once considering the life growing in her womb, the sleepless nights ahead, the gnawing hunger she faces. And thus, in the grand tradition of passing the buck, responsibility drifts away like a leaf on the wind, floating from the father to the friends, from the friends to the family, from the family to the system, and from the system to no one at all. And in the end, it is she, and she alone, left to bear the brunt of a world that excels at finding excuses, but fails at offering solutions. My friends, it is a cruel thing, this endless game of evasion, of shifting burdens and shirking duties. And while laws may govern contracts and corporations, who, I ask, governs the human heart? The answer, I fear, is no one. And so, as with all such tragedies, the only thing left to do is press forward. For in a world where responsibility is passed like a baton in an endless race, the only recourse left to those abandoned is to become their own salvation. But as for holding anyone accountable, well, you already know, that's not my department.